Hello, David, Natalie, and Ray. I'm excited to have a conversation with you guys today. It's crazy that we've been in this forsaken pandemic for so long right now. And I've told this story before, but in March of last year, I was with the Arryved president, Nancy, in Richmond, right before the world kind of just got shaken upside down. And it was so funny at that event. You know, you walked up to someone and you didn't know whether to give them a hug, an elbow, or if they went to shake your hand, they gave you just a really funny look. And it's unfortunate we're here still doing this virtual thing today, but I think things are moving in a positive direction. And I'm really excited to have a conversation today about business and really innovation, because that's what Arryved did. I've talked to so many great people at Arryved over the past few years, but we're going to take a step back today and really just talk about how Arryved came to be. So thank you three again for joining us today. And, you know, behind the scenes, we were talking a minute ago, we were talking about interview questions. And it's an interesting thing because when you're building a really positive company culture, you ask things like, Ray, you mentioned, what's your favorite desert island beer and things like that. But don't worry, we're not going to have that one today. That's not a fun interview question to start off with. You know, we've been in the pandemic so far. As people with great business minds, people in craft beer, I do have a question for you to kind of get this party started today. And we're going to begin with you, David. You know, looking at the past year and almost a half, what has been your favorite, maybe innovation, app, piece of equipment that you've used starting, you know, since COVID-19 has started? I know I put you on the spot, but I'm really curious, you know, as a bright mind, what you've been, you know, drawn to through all of this.
Well, I'm going to try to say something so it doesn't sound really self-serving because I don't really want it to be that way.
That is not allowed.
Yeah, I know. We started off as an order at the table app back in our early days. And so and it was 5 years well ahead of time. Now it feels really apropos. And then we launched our consumer app at the right beginning of COVID. And I think the first experience that I had with that, to be able to actually open a tab and pay at the table, was kind of what I've been looking for the better part of 5 years, to be able to do that. So it's been great to see that portion evolution in regards to the innovation portion of this. And I think that is just completing an entire life cycle dating back to my early days at Google and with Google Wallet in regards to what we wanted to see happen in regards to commerce, and seeing that finally sit there live was just so huge for me.
No, that's awesome. You got to see that. I think it came out at a perfect time. So besides something you've created, what would be your number two app or innovation that you've kind of been taken to through all of this?
That's an interesting one. So it's hard to be able to say, taking a look at what's all transformed in terms of the remote life. But I think how we have gotten to a point of understanding social etiquette in regards to being able to use these types of platforms, be it Zoom or this platform or Google Meet, watching that entire transformation also take place so that we can find ways to be able to engage remotely. I think it's going to enhance everything as we continue to move forward in the next few years, where we have to kind of have this mix between both platforms then at that point, because we're not always going to be like this, but there's going to be a time and a place for it. And the experiences that we've had now will hopefully drive us to be far more effective teams in the future.
I know I can agree to that. Watching the learning curve of everyone, you know, just interacting with technology over the past year has been really fun, and it's been really entertaining as well. Now, Natalie, you're up. Favorite app or innovation from the past year or so?
So we're going to take this out of the craft beer realm, and we're going to go into like everyday mom trying to get all the things done. Being able to go on the Chick-fil-A app and order and pull into a space and them know I'm there and bring food out so that my kid has something to eat is like next level. I know that sounds really ridiculous, but when you're like juggling, going a bunch of places and you're trying to do all the things, you don't have to wait in a drive-through line. You don't have to go into order. I can order at my house and show up 15 minutes later and like the food is at my car. That's probably sounds like it's being super lazy, but when you have 15 minutes to get from one spot to the next spot, it helps in that process. Super useful. And I just called out. That was one that I used, but there are so many places. And other places like that. Those sort of things. Now that it's super helpful.
Awesome. Now, Natalie, obviously when you take the kids to Chick-fil-A, it's all about them, but what is your order?
I do the sandwich with extra pickles.
You said extra pickles?
Yeah, extra.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. You're making me hungry right now. I didn't have a good lunch. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's fun. Now, Ray, it's your turn. You've had plenty of time to think. I should throw in a different question to you right now, just to completely throw you off, but I'll be kind and, we'll stick to the app or innovation question.
I would say recently I'm going to have to piggyback on David's innovation with just when COVID hit, where I think the industry was, where we were operating at that point, having to really shift our focus and rethink how we were going to do service, what we were going to do. I mean, we still hadn't had our doors opened yet. And, here's Arryved. They literally, if they were already floored down, and they found a couple extra gears and came out with curbside and delivery. And that was just it was so monumental. We didn't really have to try and figure out a solution because they were already there figuring it out for us. And we launched with curbside pickup first, and then had quickly moved into delivery as well. And I think that and in line, and also the mobile app that came out at the exact same time. So as guests were coming in, we already had a solution for contactless payment. You don't want to touch anything? Cool. Well, then you download the app and here you go. Boom. So I think that package is, especially with the timing of how that all came out and as quickly as it did, was amazing to be on the receiving end of that. And another one, it's definitely a little further in the back, and they had already come up with this solution, but it's offline. Offline mode is if it's a Saturday afternoon, in the summertime, there's, everybody has a million things going on. We got an outage when you're down 4 minutes, feels like 4 hours. For us to be able to hit the reset button, go to offline mode, continue as we are, just be in communication, all right, we're back online. And a lot of those times, Arryved was the one that was telling us we were offline. We didn't even figure it out until they gave us a call. So I think those two are just, one of them really keeps the wheels on when it's crucial, and the other one has progressed us into a different type of service.
Isn't it amazing when technology and craft beer come together and make your lives easier? It's absolutely fantastic. But before we talk about how this has all happened, I want to take it back to the mid 2010s. I was just scouring the internet, and we can learn everything about everyone on the internet these days. And I read the following quote from LinkedIn. Taking a few days now till I figure out what is next. Does anybody want to guess who made that comment?
That was David.
That was David. It's the only public thing I saw from you on LinkedIn, David, and which is a perfect lead-in for today. So, 5 years ago, you were obviously looking for your next step in your career. Can you talk a little bit about, I know you mentioned a minute ago, what you did at Google, but, what were you doing in your life prior to your time, founding Arryved?
Wow. And I think you had to bring up the one quote before I put my tinfoil hat back on and I stopped being on social media. Well, so I was just coming off of another startup that hadn't gone so well. And I was really pondering actually going back to Google. And I had a couple of friends that were urging me to go out and do my own thing at that point. Avery had just moved into the new temple of beer, as we refer to it in Boulder. But the one thing that was plaguing them was this element of being on the patio, way too many people and not enough devices. And they're trying to be able to do the service model that I think Ray has always envisioned doing. And so sitting there and watching the really huge pain points to that kind of sparked this element of, well, if I was really going to go out and try to tackle something, I wanted to do something in my wheelhouse. I've been in payments all of my life. I've always been obsessed in regards to the nexus of customer engagement, hospitality, and how payments really kind of flows in terms of all of that, in terms of commerce. So I approached Ray with this idea of doing the tableside app. And we were kind of moving along with that, but Ray had then said, we really don't like our point of sale. It doesn't meet what his vision of service was going to be. And when he had asked us for that, I said no. I think I said no a couple of times. He went, "Are you really sure you want to rethink that?" And then just from that point, spending a lot of time with him and his staff in regards to the vision. All I did was apply technology to really what his true vision was, which was how hospitality is really supposed to be engaging for customers. And I've bought and lock, stock, and barrel to that as well.
Now, David, did you have any experience in the hospitality, beer, restaurant industry prior to any of this?
What probably most people don't know, I used to be, well, the self-serving title of Google Brewmaster. I brewed for a long period of time before I started doing this. I've always had a great affinity for the craft industry. I've had the same kind of service jobs that a lot of us have had in this industry. I was a pizza delivery driver at one point. I was a bartender at some point. So there is this element that when you've done that, you know what good service looks like, and you want technology to help augment that. So being an engineer now with that background, I spent an awful lot of time being really obsessive about how we augment, not replace experiences.
Out of those early food service type jobs you had, was there any that was just a terrible experience that gave you the motivation that you would later in your life make things better?
Oh, I think one of the things that's really come up lately, because we're so in the delivery mode now, my days as a delivery driver were so awful. I think that there's so much more in terms of tech that we can build to make it easier on a delivery driver, especially when you are in this position that I think a lot of people have been in terms of COVID, where you have to shift your staff around. And some of that normally would have been in the tap room, maybe you're using for delivery these days. And so having the tools at their disposal so that you can kind of alleviate some of those frustrations, because we all have those in the service industry. We have clients that we didn't really connect very well with, or little hiccups with the system. You want to create this kind of perfect environment so that people who have had to go off and do that are more apt to want to go do those types of things for you on behalf of your establishment.
100%. And now you mentioned you kind of met Ray a few years ago and you were just brainstorming the initial concept here. Ray, what were you doing 5 years ago? And how did you guys stumble upon one another? Oh, Ray, you're on mute. You made me say it. You're on mute.
Got it. Sorry. So at the time when I first met David, we were in the process of building the new facility, and David and I met in what we call the barrel room back in the old tap room quite a bit. And I had my first experience. I didn't come to Avery with having mobility experience like a handheld technology. And I had a little, I don't know if I had resistance to it, but coming in, I was like, I just wanted to see how this works, you know? And quickly upon arriving there, I was in the barrel room and talking to a server, and she's like, hey, you want a beer? I was like, yeah, I'll take a beer. It was towards the end of the day. And next thing you know, it's on the table and we're still talking. And it was that moment. I was like, holy cow, like that just blew my mind. And, I think that was kind of like, the motivation. And then as David and I got, once we opened the new facility, we were limping along with the technology that we were using. The hardware was breaking down. It was very limiting in what we could do on the user side. And, and I just remember, having David offered to help look for a new company, a new POS solution. And we met with maybe two different vendors, and they were just lacking in one. Maybe they might have been strong in one area, but they were lacking in another. And I'll never forget, David came in and he's like, I've been doing everything I can to stay out of the POS industry. He's like, I made a decision. I'm going in and we're going to disrupt it. And that's verbatim. I'll never forget that day and that moment, because that was like, all right, game on, let's do this. And that was February of 2016. And it only took, 5 months from that day to when we were launching, which is just mind-blowing to me still. I can't believe that happened.
Wow, that is a quick turnaround. So before you and David had this light bulb moment, what were you doing before you got to Avery? Had you had brewing history, or were you in the hospitality industry?
I was in hospitality. Yeah, I had worked for a different restaurant group in town for a few years, and so very comfortable and familiar with POS. But it was always the traditional method of you go to a stationary POS, you put your order in, and you go about your time. And so the mobility of handheld technology speeds up the efficiency of service and the experience in such an impactful way. So, but yeah, I had been working in hospitality prior, and that's how I had, started with Avery.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that, Ray. And I love the makeup of, the three of you today, because David, you're the co-founder of Arryved. Ray, you're operating the brewing industry, your hospitality at Avery. Now, Natalie, how did you come into the picture?
So later that year, 2016, I was at work. I was working at Left Hand at the time. I was the general manager for the tasting room, and David and I believe Dara came in. She was someone who was with Arryved for a while, and they wanted to talk to me about this brand new POS that they were starting, and that, it was this mobile POS. They were coming up off the ground, and it was going to be very brewery centric. So it was going to form a lot better to like a tasting room and a taproom environment and all those kind of things. And I think it probably took me talking to them 2 or 3 times. They were so patient with me because I, in my nature, have a lot of questions, and I want to know how this is going to work and how that's going to work and how you're going to do this for me and how are we going to do that and all these things. And I will never forget my breaking moment was with the POS system that we were at the time, that we were with at the time. I got locked out of the back end of it. I could not log in. And so I could not run any reports or update anything. After 3 hours of waiting on hold, I finally got through to a customer service representative. And they told me that that is not something that they deal with there. A third party deals with it, and they would contact me within 3 weeks. And so I reached out to Arryved in that moment and said, I'm done. Let's figure this out. I'm on board. Let's go. And from that moment on, I had never experienced such attention to detail, customer service, just anything and everything that I could have ever wanted in any POS system that I ever dealt with. And I've been in the industry for a long time. It was all that they were showing me. And I couldn't get past that. It was like, we're new. There's going to be a few bumps. Like, we're just building this. Wasn't even a second guess for me. They worked alongside us with absolutely everything. I always tell people in the very beginning, poor David, he'd be sitting in the tasting room with his laptop open, like coding. And I'd come up to him and be like, hey, David, this is weird. Like, can we look at this really quick? And he'd be like, what is it? And I'd be talking to him, and he'd be sitting there on his computer. And like 30 seconds later, he'd go, okay, now try it. And it was better. And I was like, great, this is great. And I mean, that level of caring and really wanting to make sure that all of the users of Arryved, whether it be a bartender, a general manager, an event coordinator, whatever it is, has the best experience possible, has just never went away. It always stayed.
I love it. We're going to dive more into that momentarily. But, when David first approached you and the other folks at Arryved came to Left Hand, was it like a cold call where they just showed up and said, hey, take a look at this POS we just made? Or what was that experience like?
Well, that's where my what are we doing here? Like, what's going on? Because I was like, this is, because when you're in something like that, you have people all the time reaching out being like, hey, this is who I am. This is whatever. And that's why I'm originally from the East Coast, and I have a little bit of a hard edge to me sometimes. And that's why it took like 2 or 3 times of them kind of showing up and us kind of building a rapport for me to break down a little bit and be like, all right, this might be a thing that I'm interested in. And then, like I said, man, when that moment hit and I reached out, it was like go time, and it was awesome.
Did it feel like the salesperson trying to sell you something you didn't know you needed at that time?
It didn't, which is kind of what scared me. Because it was very genuine, and it was very like, this is what we're creating, and we feel really good about it. And we want you to be able to experience this and give your customers a better experience in the tasting room. And that kind of felt like, this isn't a sales call. This is like, you genuinely want to help people.
And
so I think that's almost what I got told by.
So Ray, and for you, what are the pain points that Arryved hit on that you were so excited to hear them just say out loud? Because we all, whatever business we're in, there's the things we wish we had a solution to. We wish someone could just magically snap their fingers and make our lives easier. What were those pain points that you experienced at Avery? You're like, man, wouldn't it be nice if?
I think to start, the technology, it was current, it was up to date. What we had been operating from a hardware side was clunky. It was like I would say kind of like the comparison of a DVD player to a VHS. It was like we were holding these like gigantic things. They weren't really, it wasn't as intuitive. So I think going to a mobile device that's current, it's on the market right now. I think that was a huge upgrade from what I was used to. Um, Starting tabs and what we had come from in the old tap room, we take credit cards. We would be able to start a tab, but we would take credit cards. There was some probably not so great practices back then. And so to be able to swipe a credit card, start a tab anywhere on the spot, anybody could pick that tab up really quickly, be able to close it out. There was a huge convenience factor that was built into the system, not only for the server and the bartenders, but for the guests. And guest convenience is huge. When people want to leave, they're ready. And when you have the ability, as a manager, I could be walking around the room with a handheld and be able to pick up and close out any check or get them started and send the beer out. So I think just that flexibility and mobility, having venue specific areas that are integrated into the network was a huge upgrade. Another one was digital signatures at the table. Like prior to that, we would be able to, you could go to a coffee shop and do that transaction and close out digitally. But I hadn't experienced that prior at a table before. And taking that kind of concept of handing over a device for a guest to sign digitally at a table, I think there was initial like, is this cool? Like, can we do this? And we brought it out to our patio where it's definitely more mobile and it's a little kind of viber out there, and nobody complained, not one person. And but we still had the fallback to if somebody was like set in their way or they just wanted to have that signed receipt, we could easily flip that switch and go back. But I estimated out of the gate, if we had 16 servers on a Saturday, as a Saturday shift, that would save us about 8 hours of labor a day just by doing digital signatures, which was obviously, that's giant from a labor perspective. So those are some of the big ones for sure.
No, like going back to this, Natalie, you mentioned when they first approached you, you hadn't really thought about these things, and the more they talked with you, the more you fell in love with the platform. Now, Ray, I'm going to give you a quick follow-up, and Natalie, I want to hear from you. But Ray, did you already have some sort of checklist in your head of features that you're like, man, it'd be fantastic if a POS system had this? That way, when you and David connected, you already just had this mental go-to list of things you wanted to throw his way? Or, how did the features that you helped bring to the table come to be?
I think in those initial conversations between David and I, a lot of that was probably more bigger picture. How is this going to impact service? How are we going to integrate it into our labor, into just how we provide service? And I think a lot of that, those were some of those bigger discovery conversations. But what David and his team did right out of the gate was they were at our Avery, weekly, and we'd set up, brainstorming sessions with our staff. Our servers and our managers would sit around at a table with David and his crew and be like, hey, exactly what you just said. This works great, but what could we do? Could we do this differently? Or I hate how this works. What if we did this? And we just started lobbing them all these different ideas and thoughts, and they would take that back to into their office and code that out, and come back the next week, and then we started doing dry runs, with friends and family. And so I think a lot of that progression, it started kind of big picture, and then we started just opening those doors up to more of the granular details of how to apply that. And they did. They took all of that and implemented it.
No, I absolutely love that. Natalie, you mentioned the early days where they'd be hanging out in your tap room. You'd say, hey, David, can you fix this? And 30 seconds later, he told you to restart the computer. What were those experiences like when you were just working through the kinks and figuring out, the best features to add and how to make it go smooth? I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about those days.
To be honest, it sounds like it would be cumbersome and frustrating, but it wasn't at all, because as you were coming up with things and as you were seeing things that you want to change or make different, it was happening. So you were actually kind of customizing the system to exactly how you wanted to see it from the very beginning, which was completely unheard of with a POS system. So I really was so grateful. And, Avery didn't know it at the time, but knowing that they were the ones that kind of really did all the hard work with, David and the team of like, okay, this is really what we want to see. These are the things that we need. This is what we have to have done. And then kind of by the time they came to me and they had all that stuff, then it was like the little things. It was like, oh, it'd be awesome if this button was on this page rather than this page, or, oh, it took me 3 clicks to get here. What about if we only did it in 2? Or just really kind of like minute little things that you would see. Oh, this size is here on this screen. Can I put it here on this screen? Whatever it was always just these kind of like fine tweaking things that we were able to, talk about. And like Ray said, you would take it to David, or if he was there, you would say it in the moment, and then it would just happen. So rather than kind of being this time of like, frustration or trying to figure things out, it was kind of this time of learning and being like, oh, we can turn this into anything we really want, because as long as it's something that, you can explain properly and the guys and gals can understand, like they'll make it happen. There were definitely specific things about the system that we needed to see in order to be able to transfer from the POS that we were using to Arryved, for example, like keg deposits. Keg deposits were something that we needed to be able to see. So it was one of those things where, we just kind of walked through with them. All right, this is what we need. And it was there. And so it was, integrating of orchestrated beer, things like that, just all these things, that pop up that there's not another company where you're going to call them and be like, oh, hey, it'd be really nice if I could have this. And then it actually happened. Whereas
then you yell across the tap room, David, fix this right now.
It was like, hey, it'd be really nice if we could do this. And then even when it came to in the beginning, like reporting and things like that, oh, I would love to see a report that showed me this, this, and this. A week later, it was like, here you go. This is what we got. So it was actually I'm so happy that we got in at that time, because we were just kind of able to work through all those things and really build it out to a point where, it was super user friendly from the very beginning.
Well, and I'm super thankful for Natalie and Ray kind of and their patience for a lot of this. But I think the eye-opening portion, especially in the early days, was how we really needed to build this uber configurable system. And as Natalie has touched on, hasn't existed in this industry. We have so many different hooks and levers and things that we can be able to do that has really evolved from our customer base and the features. I think last year, the stat that was told to me was 600 different feature requests were put into the system or were recorded for us to be able to do. We try our best to be able to get through a lot of them. Now we kind of operate on the rule of threes, which is when you hear the same thing 3 times, it definitely needs to get into a sprint to be able to get done. And then we start working down the list from there. And so we are definitely a system that is built from our clients and from what their experiences are, and things are always shifting and always changing. But the experiences here laid the groundwork so that we have the base to be able to build from, and the data that's all there. Now we just have to get it to a point where everybody can consume it.
Now, David, when I talk to brewery owners and business owners, I love to ask them to describe their business in 5 words. Like, what is your brewery in 5 words? And don't just say a family-friendly place with great beer, because obviously, every brewery wants to be something like that, and who doesn't want to make beer first off? But when you first launched Arryved, you obviously chose to be a craft beer specific to POS, POS specific to craft beer. But looking a little bit further than that, what were your goals in those early days, the problems you wanted to solve? Are there any, like, you talk about all the feature requests you have right now, but early on, there weren't 600 feature requests coming at you. What were the top priorities on your list? And those problems that you truly wanted to solve?
Well, it's the same problem that we really want to still solve today, which is we want this beautiful, seamless experience for all customers, and customers for us being both on the brewery side and their customers as well, to blend all of this together. When I first set out to do a lot of this, the one part that really kept coming up over and over was in regards to the subjective nature of Yelp and Yelp reviews and how you're able to combat an awful lot of that. which is why the tableside app was so important, because my firm belief has always been vote by wallet is far more impactful than anything that you would actually say about another establishment, because you can combat anybody who just is going to post that one negative review with an awful lot of data that sits on the other side that says we're always busy and every table is full. And you want to have every small to medium business have that experience and have that data at their fingertips, because that's what enterprises have. And until that same level is at the places that's really the true economic driver of our industry, people are really operating in the dark. And so part of the early days also from Ray's perspective, when we were talking about the reporting, is there was so many pieces he wanted to know. He wanted to know about his clients. He wanted to know about what beers were moving, what worked better on certain days than everything else. And so all that stuff was ingrained at the very beginning to build this, again, very seamless, beautiful experience for all of the customers who are players on the system.
Coming from Google, it's obvious that data was already in your blood. But one thing I've found just talking with so many brewers, they're not necessarily data people, and Arryved has so much valuable data they can use. What was the educational process? And Ray and Natalie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. When David came in and say, hey, we have all this fantastic data, how did you take it from we've got this to how to use it? And how did you teach people not necessarily used to using data to make it a valuable part of their operation? And I love to hear, like Ray and Natalie, how you kind of reacted to having this data now available to you.
On my side, it was honestly something that was never as readily available as David and the team made it. So it was really learning all of the data that they had available. So in the beginning, it was just kind of talking with them and looking through reports and seeing everything that was available. And then, just starting to kind of comb through things and use it. I think, in the early days, it obviously started off with a few reports. I think we're at the point now where, and tell me if I'm wrong, David, we have like 112 or something around there reports available for people, that's a lot of data. That's a lot of reporting. And it's funny when we do trainings now, or when, you're kind of walking someone through the beginnings of their just signing on with Arryved, and they're trying to learn the things, and we're kind of teaching about the things. It's always that, there's no way we're going to hit on all of this. So basically what I try to get people to do now, and what I kind of try to do in the beginning, was tell me what you're looking for. Tell me what you're trying to pull from these things. Like, what do you want out of this? And I will point you to where that information is.
And Natalie, had you been a data person prior to this, before you kind of got in the relationship with Arryved, were you someone who looked at like trends and numbers from past POS systems? And you're nodding your head. I love it.
Yes, I am a self-proclaimed, and I'll lower my head, I am a numbers nerd. I love looking at numbers and figuring things out, and I love looking at trends, and I love seeing why things are happening the way I love doing all that stuff. So I always previously just kind of had to build all my own stuff. Whereas the way that it's positioned and Arryved is you don't have to do that. You can, download a few different reports, compile them, and you have your numbers. So it just made that aspect of my job at that time so much easier to have all of these numbers available to me to be able to use and really be able to figure out timing and, even down to times of the day and specific beers that are selling at specific times of day. That's how granular you can get, which to some people, that's not a big deal. For me, I think that's awesome.
So I've become a data nerd, mainly from craft beer, actually. But looking at all those data points you talked about, is there one favorite example you can give of you looked at some number and it told you this and you were like mind blown? Is there an example that comes to mind?
I don't know if there's a specific example, although what I found super useful was, for example, if you're doing a release, let's say you have a huge release going on and it's the middle of a Saturday night afternoon, and you're really trying to look at the numbers and see what's going on, what's working well. All of the data is live time. You can jump in the back end and look at data in live time, and you can really see what's happening. And I think being able to do that and really being able to steer your day according to that data was super useful. And that was kind of mind blowing for me, because I couldn't do that with any of my previous POSs. I couldn't log in at 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon, look at some numbers really quick, really try to figure some stuff out, and then kind of steer my day from there.
It's just like when we first started using email and you could just refresh the screen and voila, you had a new message. Just having the data at your fingertips. It's super impressive. It's super great. We can rely on things so quickly. I mean, it seems so basic to say, but it's so true.
Yep.
Ray, how about you? How did the data and having access to it affect your operation?
I think that was, all POSs, you obviously run reports and you get information from those reports. And I think that what started separating from my experiences with what Arryved was putting out was I was able to run reports that I could start making decisions off of, and really identifying what those trends are based off of compiling that data and giving me averages. And I think that, an example is they have a bi-weekly revenue report that, run over a span of time will let you know your Mondays are averaging this, your Tuesdays are averaging this, and so on. And, our Wednesdays were just dragging, and we were able to, put a special out there and really, we could identify Wednesday as the dog day. What can we do to help recover that? And we made some changes and tweaks in the menu. And before you know it, Wednesday became our best midweek, best day in midweek by far. And as Natalie was just saying too, the live data is another experience that I hadn't been a part of before. Like their dashboard, and you can go back in time and look at that dashboard too. But the dashboard going live in that day, you could drill down to whatever category you're looking. You can look at a general sales category. You can break that down to, I want to see what my special app of the day is doing. You can drill down to exactly how many of those apps were ordered, and then they'll give you a timestamp of within the half an hour of when they were ordered. And having that kind of data is awesome. Like to be able to go back like a year from now and be like, all right, on Mardi Gras we had the special menu. What were the drivers? And then you just go right back to that Mardi Gras day, go to the dashboard, and then you have you can pull out any information you want for how that day was, right down to, as I said, that hourly data is huge. We got a giant spike between 3 and 5. We got to be prepared for that because that's normally when we would get a lull, something like that, So yeah, I think that having that data available, especially current time, is huge.
Are there any data points that have surprised you over your time using Arryved?
Yeah, I think one of the is like the dog. If you hear my dog, it's my dog scratching at the window. Guest count. I'm like fascinated by guest count, and what Arryved does with guest count is it breaks it down into 3 or 4 different segments of the day. What your guest count is as open, your middle of the day, what you did, evening, and then your close. But not only does it give you that snapshot, but it also breaks it down by the venue. So if I want to know what the patio is doing during these times of the day, I have that data. And I think that being able to, to segregate out the guest point by venue and have it time stamped and, into sections of the day, that's really awesome information to have. Because you can really be prepared going into a seasonal. I think that's where you really start to use that data to prepare yourselves for the seasons, weeks. You're going into the holiday season. What you can pull up last year's and then really kind of hone in on where those venues that were getting hit the hardest are.
Awesome. So David, we've heard a little bit from the brewery side, but from your end, what was the educational curve like teaching the breweries the value of what you gave them access to? Did you have to change up your Google lingo a little bit and kind of get it in more layman's terms to, make sure these brewery folk understood?
I don't know that it was so much that. I think I spend most of my time, just like I do today, listening far more than I do talking. It is really easy to be a technologist at the end of the day and just go and try to geek out on that. But then you have to kind of shed that persona and then go out when you're talking to people. And really, I think that's been the hallmark of not just the early days, but everything that we do even today across our entire customer support team, our success team, our engineering team. We spend far more time listening than we do talking because there's so much more to be picked up from the observing. That's the part I probably miss more than anything else in regards to COVID, is going and hanging out at some of our establishments, watching interaction and human behavior, taking notes, bringing it back to the team, talking to the owners, being able to find out what works. All of those pieces are really, really key. And so I didn't find that I had to change my lingo, just more that I didn't have to be as forward in regards to trying to throw out solutions. It's technology. We move bits. I can sit here and say, yeah, we can do a lot of things, just need time.
Now, one thing that's really interested me, you've talked a little bit about how you have the consumer app now that consumers can use. And I did a study a while back, and I found that when people have a physical menu, they're going to spend 35% more than people who don't have a physical menu. What are your thoughts on how technology plays into this? Do you feel that having that menu on your phone or access to all this information, is it comparable to having, that piece of paper that has the brewery's beer list on it? Or do you find maybe that it's even easier having this technology because you can just click a button in order that much easier on an impulse?
I think it's going to be really up to the establishments how they want to move forward in regards to this, because I think some places really want to have that kind of feature and functionality where others still want to have that first touch and first engagement. So again, you have to figure out the right balance and blend. Now, on that side of it, consumers are always going to be the ones that dictate our behavior because if they come in with a certain expectation. However, I really honestly feel like we're going to snap back to some degree in regards to hospitality. We've all been cooped up in our houses, in our apartments, in places far too long. People cannot wait to be served by another person. And so that piece of technology doesn't really replace that human interaction. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to win out by having good service models that still address that piece. So that was kind of a roundabout way to kind of say, wait to see what your customers end up doing. We're kind of waiting to see what they end up doing too, because they're going to dictate how we're going to move forward and be flexible. That's the number one thing that we talk about in regards to the system. Your customers are going to tell you how things are going to be. So you're going to have to be flexible enough to change based off of what their demands are.
And that's one thing I've always really appreciated and respected about Arryved. Your goal isn't just to make the business for the staff better, but it's to also make the experience for the guest even more memorable. So I love how you have that focus as part of your business model. It's absolutely fantastic. I think it just resonates with me. It resonates with a lot of people. But, we talked a lot about features so far. So you say you play by the rule of three. Has there been a feature that Ray and Natalie didn't generously give you in the early days that you started to see that you're like, really? This is something that breweries want available? Is there that one that surprised you?
Oh, man.
You've gotten so many. There has to be at least one that was like, oh my gosh, really? This is cool, but I never thought I would see it.
The one that really comes to mind that was a request, and it's still stayed in the back of my mind, and being a data nerd like Ray and Natalie as well. One that was pitched to us was in regards to flights to pints. So a report that basically told you what the conversion rate was from having a 4-ounce pour to a 16-ounce pour. Now that I say it, it seems so elementary in terms of what should really be out there, because I could see where a brewer really wants to have that information. I go out and I put out 4 ounces of a beer every taster at a time, and I want to find out if it's any good. People can just put it onto a flight board, but that doesn't tell me if somebody really likes it, because the part that, again, vote by wallet, that tells you everything that you need to know is, if I went from that 4 ounces and said, yeah, I want that 16 of it, that tells you what you need to know.
That's absolutely amazing. I just want to reiterate that you can get the data. I can have a flight right now, and by the fact that I had that IPA on my flight, then ordered a full pour of it, you're going to take that data and the brewery has access to it and to know that there was a conversion there. That is super cool. Natalie, is that a feature you found fun over the years?
There were so many. I mean, that's one. Being able to actually, the flight feature is actually a feature that came about after the beginning. It wasn't available right in the very, very beginning. That I don't know how hard Ray pushed, but I was probably one of the hardest people pushing for it, because at Left Hand, we had multiple different kinds of flights. We had predetermined flights. We had flights that people could build their own, all these things. And rather than want to hit all these buttons, okay, we have 4 on this flight, we have 4 on this flight. We just wanted to be able to hit a flight button, choose what was on that flight, and move forward. And so that was one of those things where I was like, I don't want to touch it 6 times. I only want to hit 3 buttons so that we can move forward faster. That was me. That's who I was. And so, but what seems like something that's so minute when you talk about faster service and better service and more interactive service and those things, little things like that are the things that change a customer's perspective of the establishment that they're in, versus, having to do it the long way. And I can say that that's something that the entire Arryved staff was super cognizant of when we would say something like that. Like, hey, if it was just like this, it would make it easier on the guest. I'm not just trying to make it easier on myself. I want this to go faster for the guest. It's a Saturday afternoon. You have a group of 7 people that come in and each of them want a separate flight. I need to get that in the system as fast as I can so I can start pouring those flights so I can hand them to the people, right? So again, kind of just what you mentioned before, it wasn't just I want to make it easier on the establishment. It's, I want to create that experience for the guest so that they leave and they're like, oh my God, that was awesome. And, want to come back.
No, Natalie, I absolutely love it because it truly is the little things that make a big difference. And it might not be things the customers are thinking about, but if you can make their experience even better by learning from that little thing, it's going to benefit everyone, the staff and the guests, for future experiences. I absolutely love that. Now, one thing that I truly miss in the current state of the world, I really miss driving. And I miss driving because I used to listen to so many podcasts, and I love all the business podcasts, just the stories where I learn about how someone grew their company. And my whole philosophy is if I just have that one takeaway that I can bring into my life to make my day better, my company better, then I've wasted my hour and I've learned one thing. And I truly miss listening to massive amounts of podcasts. And now I just spend that time on Zoom instead of, listening to podcasts. So I guess I'm thankful I get to talk to actual people now rather than listening to 2 people have a conversation. But David, the Arryved story, is something that fascinates me. When I first started, talking to, I think, Alex a few years ago, and I don't know how Alex and I first connected. I think I might have shot her a random email saying, I love what you're doing. My other company, Secret Hopper, has similar goals of helping maximize customer experience. So I think we connected. I remember just chatting for probably an hour the first time we ever hopped on a call. And it's nice to see her on, Zoom, StreamYard, whatever it is we're using these days. But the best thing about learning about a company is seeing how you went from the tap rooms with Ray and Natalie, brainstorming on the fly, making things happen on the, just super quick, to where you are today. At what point in time did you realize that the idea had traction and it was something that you wanted to scale?
So I think I was extraordinarily conservative our first year. We had Avery, Left Hand, Denver Beer Company, and I think Pals and Ballot House for our customers, and Ratio beginning the next year. And I'm not a salesperson. I'm a far better technologist than I would be a public speaker or probably a salesperson. So it was really what hit home when Nancy came on board and really had started to figure out the elements to our business model, and starting to actually talk with other customers. And not only that, when customers started going to Avery and asking them and saying, what do you guys think about the system? And then hearing the banter back and forth, that was that telling moment where I knew we were on the right track. But there's an even bigger key to all of this. And I think I've been very fortunate in my entire career. I've built several teams, granted on somebody else's dime before this one. And you recognize how important culture is, and Craft has a great culture in it. And if there's not a place in tech, and Google, we got a little close, but there's not a culture like Craft where it's that belief that the high tide rises all ships, that we're all in this together, we're going to help each other out. And I think embodying that inside of a technology company as well has been really key. We're a small team, but we all feel like we can take on the biggest problems of every day. And that culture is really the big key, I think, that what keeps driving us forward.
No, I love that. Do you believe Arryved would be at the point you are today if you were just a tech company who targeted craft beer? Or is the fact that you are a craft beer lover who made a technology product that benefits the industry, how much did that play into things?
Oh, I think it played into everything that we do. And again, going into the culture of the places that we serve, this is just, there's no place that you would want to be able to get up and do the work that you do every day compared to what is embodied inside of Craft. It doesn't feel hyper competitive to me. We're not all here to shoot each other down. We want to make the best experience across the board. So this feels like a partnership with every person who is a client of ours. It's oftentimes why we don't refer to them just as clients. They are partners of ours, helping to build out the system. It's a true belief in what we live every day, that what we do.
and you want to see them succeed. You're invested in their business. You want to see craft beer grow, and I think you're doing, awesome job of that. Now, Natalie, you started off in the brewery world, but if I'm not mistaken, you are now on Team Arryved. How did that transition come to be?
Freaking COVID. No, we're just gonna blame everything. So, yeah, I had been on the hospitality side and in restaurants and then breweries and things like that for an extremely long time. If we'll get a little deep for a minute and kind of a little personal, I can tell you that from the time I started interacting with Arryved, literally from some of the first few interactions I had with David and the other people on the team, once the team started getting bigger and I started seeing the people that they were bringing onto the team, and you really started to feel that kind of culture that David was just talking about. And it was one of those things where you look from the outside and you're like, is that really how it is? Like, is that what you do, or is that just what they're showing? It sounds like feedback. I'm sorry. And so, I took note of that immediately. It was something that I was just always, enthralled by, coming from a customer service side of things. And last year, just a few things changed. And if there was one place that I could have gone, it was with Arryved. And I was lucky enough for them to bring me into the fold. And I can tell you, starting as an outsider and now being an insider, what you see on the outside is exactly what it's like on the inside, if not better.
No, I love your energy. Thanks for sharing that story. Now, Ray, you're still with Avery. So what's it like for you to look back on the past 5 years and be like, hey, David and I had this idea. We worked through the kinks in the tap room, and now you see Arryved where they are today. I mean, I know, if I'm not mistaken, you're on the board of directors at Arryved, so I'm sure you still have a part in the conversation. But looking back on the success over the past 5 years, did it surprise you to the level of which it was accepted by the craft beer industry?
There. Well, first, I'm actually not with Avery anymore. I have recently moved on. I'm getting ready for a big life change, but just looking back over that, I hear the feedback too. Looking back over that time, am I surprised? I'm not surprised at all. And just knowing David for as long as I have known him, and just to what Natalie was saying too, like in those early days, he spent our entire opening hours there with his laptop open, squashing bugs. We're like, hey, we got going on here. You give him the check number. He's like, all right, squashed. So I think that just the tone that he set right out of the gate with his team, and as Natalie was saying, like the team as it's grown and progressed has been amazing. I think what separates Arryved greatly from other businesses, not only just POS, is like you feel the pulse. There's a heartbeat there. There are people there, and they're not afraid to listen to you, take suggestions, and turn that into bigger opportunities. And so no, ultimately I'm not surprised. And it's amazing to have been a part of this and watch it grow to where it is now. And I mean, just thinking about these next couple of years, especially, pretty exciting for sure.
One thing that I really enjoy is kind of taking from what you just said. When you can take a topic matter, that's not necessarily something you get really enthused about. POS systems, for example. Let's go back 5 years. Did you think you'd ever get as excited about talking about a POS system? But then you get immersed in that company culture. You feel the passion. You understand the problems they're solving, and you see the problems being solved. And I think that's one thing I really enjoy in craft beer professionals. There's so much positivity around Arryved, and I think that's because you care about your customers. It might not be the early days where you're sitting in a tap room, taking notes and making them happen right then and there, but the fact that you still want to respond to the feedback. And David, I bet you still want to respond as quickly as you once did. I think that's absolutely fantastic that you put the customer so high up, on your totem pole, because that's what made you, where you are today. But looking ahead, though, what are the goals moving forward with Arryved? You put out the consumer-facing option for, maybe came out around the time of the pandemic. But what's next in the world of Arryved? Are there more innovations you want to take to the POS? Are there other products you want to put out there?
Well, I think POS is just a jumping off point for a lot of different things that we want to be able to do. Being in the center of the transaction is always that kind of richness of data that we know that we can be able to use to leverage more success for our clients. When I look at the baseline of what we put together for our loyalty program, there's so much more that we want to do to help drive engagement, because just giving away free stuff, that's just giving away free stuff. Driving behavior, driving loyalty. One of the terms I will always steal from Ray is that idea of being a contagious loyalist. How do you build that person? And there's ways to touch that person in very non-slimy, spammy ways to be able to do it. And I think a large portion of what we want to do, as I would continue to talk about the beautiful customer experience that we really want to have, this very seamless double rainbow type of experience, that loyalty then becomes a real centerpiece for a lot of that. So it drives all of their interactions. I do want to hit on a couple of things that came up in the comments, because when we talk about future, naturally, a lot of the things that could help jumpstart us to get to some of these things would be integrations, but we're very choosy about the integrations that we do. We only really want to kind of combine our powers with similar companies that have similar ethos and are very customer centric. And so that's why we haven't gone down the path of doing a lot of different integrations. And we weigh this build versus integrate an awful lot until we find that there's the right partner that's in the ecosystem that we really want to be able to do this, and that will continue to put the customers first. So there are ones that come up. We're always evaluating whether or not we should do some of them and where we put them on the timeline. But it really starts with whether or not we kind of coexist with the same kind of ethos.
I absolutely love that. You want to have partners you feel the same as. You wouldn't work with someone you didn't see yourself having a beer with. And I think, Arryved was built on a beer, and it continues to grow based on the beer industry and their needs. So I think everything you do in the craft beer industry is much appreciated. I just love the enthusiasm today. I love always talking with people from Arryved, and I appreciate, you sharing the story, because so often we take for granted what we have in front of us. Oh, Arryved, they're the POS system that's, built for craft beer. But why did this come to be? So I hope today, everyone listening got a little background information on how it came to be. And David, Natalie, and Ray, it was an absolute pleasure getting to know you both. I mean, it's been a weird year, but I'm really looking forward to a time where we're sharing beers in person. Until then, we're going to do little human interaction things like this. But thank you again. I'm excited to follow those innovations. And David, Natalie, and Ray, thank you again for being here today. Keep up the good work. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys. Thank you.